Hello everybody, welcome to part 2 of Community Mental Health series, The Truth About Mental Disorders. So what is the truth about mental disorders? The truth about mental disorders is that they do not define you. They're just a label. They don't determine whether or not you can live a fulfilling life. You can still reach your dreams, desires, goals, and find fulfillment here on earth. In the following video, we will address this truth by taking a look at some historical geniuses, who have been speculated to live with a mental disorder. We'll also look at the continuum of mental health. So that means we're going to define mental health. It's a spectrum. Mental health ranges from what you would say is a mental disorder all the way into mental health and in between. And of course, we're all striving for mental health, all of us. And then we'll do a brief overview of some causes, treatments, and symptoms of mental disorders. So stay tuned. Some of our greatest innovators and educators were suspected to have a mental disorder. Suspected, I say, because some of these diagnosis labels did not exist in their day and age. Albert Einstein, he was suspected of being on the autism spectrum as he met 17 of the possible criteria for autism as laid out by the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Yet he still made remarkable achievements such as the publishing of On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies in 1905. It was a book that changed the world. It led to the atomic bomb, space travel, and new frontiers in human scientific understanding. Yet, as a young boy, it was suspected that he had autism. He was always considered the odd one. He didn't speak until age 3. But look, once he started talking, it was in complete sentences. So this boy knew what was going on. He would rehearse sentences like in his head before saying them, just to make sure he didn't mess up. So he was probably really shy. At age 11, he was doing college level mathematics and physics. So while his intellectual level thrived, his social skills lacked, which is common amongst kids with autism. So what's really cool about him, I think, is that when he wrote his books on gravity and light and physics, when he wrote these theories, he was actually on college break. He wasn't at the summertime chilling at the pool. He was making inferences, and he did all this during the summer vacation. So it just showed that he was really interested and dedicated, and he was able to make a huge impact on this world. The next person is Isaac Newton. He's also been diagnosed with the autistic spectrum disorder. And one of my favorite artists is Vincent van Gogh. So Vincent van Gogh, he was suspected of having all types of mental disorders, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, addiction. Oh, the list goes on and on. Researchers say have speculated all sorts of things, mainly because he's published, or not published, but he created not over 900 paintings, but just in the span of 9 years of his life. He was a young man. He died at 33 when he died. Yet he did some remarkable things in his life. So the point being of highlighting these influencers of thought is that mental disorders don't limit a person from contributing to society. Neither do they have to stop anyone from finding fulfillment in life. There are even present-day celebrities that open up about their mental health challenges. Take, for example, comedic actor Darrell Hammond has talked about his self-injury stemming from when he was a child. Actress Kristen Dunst, she shares openly about her experience with depression and claims that although many people are embarrassed to talk about their struggles, it's weird for people not to go through depression or mental struggles. NFL player Brandon Marshall announced he had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and says, "I'll make myself vulnerable if it saves somebody's life." And honestly, that's what talking about mental health, and mental health is really just talking about the way you view things. It's connecting with people and saying, hey, this is the issue I'm facing and this is my thought process behind it. And people are able to say, okay, I understand that, but have you tried this? Or, hey, I understand that I'm going through the same thing. That's talking about mental health. Okay, before we look at the definition of a mental disorder, or the objective terminology for mental disorder, let's define mental health. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So it affects how we think, feel, and act around others. It therefore helps us determine how we handle stress and relate to others. So it impacts our social relationship. Mental health is also defined as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her abilities. So do you know your potential? Do you know your value? Do you know who you are? Can cope with normal stresses of life, because we'll never rid of stress. We will never rid of stress in our lives. There will always be stress. It just depends on how you handle it, and maybe you don't call it stress. Can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So they're not self-absorbed. They're giving to those around them somehow, some way. So from the looks of these definitions, mental health is something that we all engage in, are always sustaining it or working to sustain it, whether you have a diagnosis or not. Mental health applies to everybody. But another thing I would like you to consider is that we all have been managing our mental health during this current pandemic in 2020. We're here, we're at home, we're having to readjust our whole life schedules, our businesses, our kids. We're having to stay away from people we love and used to seeing on a daily basis. Imagine living alone and not having a hug in a couple of weeks. Imagine, we need touch. Touch is so important. And yet we're being asked to socially distance, which I totally understand. The World Health Organization defines mental disorders as characterized by some combination of abnormal thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and relationships with others. The key word is abnormal. The person who's experiencing this disorder is experiencing something that is the average person isn't. So it's abnormal. Pratt, which is the author of a psychiatric rehabilitation textbook used in schools today, disorders are impairment in functioning that interferes with everyday life to the point where individuals cannot acquire the skills to cope with the demands of modern life. In other words, causing disorder. The phrase impairment in functioning, this reminds us that a diagnosis can only be made if a person is experiencing symptoms that interfere with their daily living. So, and here's another definition by the National Alliance of Mental Illness, who specifically works with mental illnesses, which are best known as things, we'll get into that a little later, but they're medical conditions that disrupt a person's thinking, resulting in diminished capacity for coping in ordinary life demands. And it sounds just like a mental disorder. The bottom line is that mental disorders tend to impair people's ability to connect with others in the community. And our goal of this mental health in the community series is to restore relationships. Here is a list of mental disorders found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM-5. DSM-5 is a accumulation of over 10 years of research by international scientists made to define and classify mental disorders in order to improve diagnosis, treatment, and research. Practitioners use the DSM to give a person a label based off symptoms they are displaying over a period of time, and it is what insurance companies use to determine what they will and will not cover. But practitioners use the DSM-5 to make diagnoses. It's basically a chart. Hopefully they have previous experience where they can recognize certain disorders or certain treatments, actually. The point of me reading all these disorders is that there's a label for everything we do. The list goes on. Autism spectrum disorder actually used to be known as a form of schizophrenia, which I didn't know that. In 1908, Eugene Buller coined autism in self-absorbed schizophrenic patients. About 30 years later, Leo Kanner found these characteristics in children. So then, this is when doctors start to catch the disorder early and research took off. Furthermore, disorders are always being added to the DSM. There's something called gambling disorder in the DSM-5. Also, there's been talk about seasonal depression. Point being is that labels do not define us. There can really be a disorder for every single thing we do. We all show remnants of different mental disorders, yet they don't create disorder in our lives to the level that they do in other people's lives. So therefore, we're not going to be diagnosed. It's important to note that mental disorders are common, more common than we realize. Everyone at some point is touched by a mental disorder, directly or indirectly. 25% of adults, 18 and older population, has experienced a form of mental disorder requiring medication. So, not talking about mental health is ignoring the afflictions of 1/4 of our human population. 25%, 1/4 of our human population. 25% of our adults is about equal to the total percentage of people diagnosed with cancer each year, those living with heart disease, people infected with HIV/AIDS, and those afflicted with diabetes combined. And this is from the book titled Troubled Minds. 90% of people with mental illness are not violent. And then when they are violent, it's usually self-inflicted. So if we look at some causes of mental illnesses, we're going to say the life choices of a fallen humanity, as we talked about a faulty human condition, if we want to get deep with it. The onset of mental illnesses are due to environmental interactions with our own biology. It's hard to pinpoint the exact environmental changes, though stress or traumatic experience is usually the cause. There's no gene, so for example, there's no gene that says autism will appear. However, the child will start to display symptoms around age 2, where they may stop doing certain behaviors, such as pointing or making eye contact. That's where autism diagnosis comes from. The criteria is very long. And schizophrenia only appears usually in early adulthood, as we mentioned. So it's usually due to, they say autism, people have said maybe medication has caused it, but there's no study to prove that. They say sometimes that researchers have said that viruses that have affected the baby prenatally could have affected the baby. Possibly. It could have been some sort of stress. But however, twin studies do confirm that if one twin has a mental disorder, the other twin is more likely to have that disorder as well. And usually they end up due, even if they live apart. In fraternal twins, the probability is less likely, researchers have found. So medications are used to treat chemical imbalances in the brain caused by the mental disorder by inhibiting some neurons and exciting others. Some symptoms can be scary for an individual, as my brother expressed, and cause them to lose friendships, possessions, and sometimes even their life. It is important to note that medications are used to manage symptoms. They are not a cure. So, for example, some people take headache medicines, whether that be pharmaceuticals or medicinal plants. We use some sort of medication to, help maintain some symptoms we may be experiencing. Medicines help mask pain. They don't get to the underlying root cause. Medications for mental disorders are best when paired with counseling or some sort of therapy where the client is engaging in learning. Medications do have side effects. Antiseptics are known to make people gain 20 to 100 pounds. However, don't let these side effects discourage you from getting the help that you need. It can be argued that the reason why the body has these types of side effects is because the medication is actually doing something to heal the body. And the body have been, the mind and the brain have been functioning in this certain capacity for so long. And as soon as you give medications to help balance it out, you're going to experience some type of setback. The saying, it's going to get worse before it gets better, sometimes is the case. So just stick it out and just see and look forward to what you're going to learn on this new journey in life if you do end up having to take some medications. Not diagnosing anybody. Like I said, the point, one of the goals of this video is to empower people who do have a mental disorder. And some people are on medications. And so if you're watching this video and you have a mental disorder and you're on medication, and maybe you're thinking about starting medication. You mentioned that medications are best paired with like counseling or psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is basically just more intense hands-on learning. You're basically learning how to do things, such you're learning about your disorder, how to manage triggers, what are your emotions, how you're learning about your body. You're learning how to self-reflect and look at yourself. Because education, we found that education actually in learning, engaging in deep thinking, this is what strengthens the brain. This is what causes, when people engage in deep intellectual thinking, when they are taking a subject matter and they're saying, what is this? Oh, this reminds me of, and they ask questions and then they discuss it with their peers. This is when the mind starts to do different things. So chemical imbalances that take place in the mind line up depending on what you're thinking about, and it provides clarity in your mind. It can be beneficial for anybody. Therapy is just more intensive hands-on learning. Mental disorders do not have to define the capability of any individual, because research has proven that our brains can be rewired. Oh, this is going to be a fun topic. So next video, we're going to talk about your brain can be rewired. And we're going to meet Dr. Carolyn Leaf. And so if you're interested, stick around. Thank you for joining me for part 2, the truth about mental disorders. If you're interested in learning more, some little examples about what goes on in psychotherapy, stick around for the next video. I hope you learned a lot about why a mental disorder doesn't have to define you, how to support people who have a mental disorder, and overall brought more mental health awareness. Thank you.